Welcome to Legendary Shleep. Tonight, we're going back to the oldest story the Norse people ever told. Before the world was shaped, before there were humans or even gods, there was a giant named Ymir. He wasn't a hero or a villain. He was the beginning. A being so strange and powerful that his body would one day become the land, the sky, and the sea. It's a story about where we come from and what had to be lost to make space for something new. You'll hear the names of ancient gods like Odin, Vili, and Ve. You'll see the rise of a world shaped by sacrifice and mystery. If you're enjoying these stories, consider liking the video and subscribing to Legendary Shleep. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you? Chapter 1. Ginnungagap. In the beginning, there was nothing but space. Not empty, quiet space like the night sky, but something colder, wider, and older. The Norse called it Ginnungagap. A vast gap between worlds that didn't exist yet. On one side, the land of ice, Niflheim, frozen and silent. On the other, the land of fire, Muspelheim, burning and wild. Between them, the gap stretched endlessly, where cold met heat, frost met flame, and something new began. At the center of that meeting, the first living being took shape. He didn't come from a womb or from gods. He wasn't born, he just appeared. His name was Ymir. Ymir was a giant, but not like the giants in fairy tales. He was the beginning of everything that would come after. Huge, strange, and alone. His breath formed winds. His sweat gave life to other creatures. The frost around him melted and refroze in patterns that became forms. Some like him, some not. From under his arms, more giants grew. From his legs, strange shapes formed and wandered off. He drank from the udder of a cosmic cow named Audumbla, who licked ice for food. As she licked the frost, a shape slowly emerged. Not another giant, but something new. The first god, Buri. So now there were two kinds of beings. Giants, wild and ancient like Ymir, and gods, newer and full of purpose. The gods would one day shape the world. The giants would resist. And all of it began in this strange meeting of elements, where nothing should have existed, but something did. Ymir slept and dreamed, and in his dreams the world stirred, but his dreams were not peaceful. The more he grew, the more he filled the void. He was not cruel, but he was chaos. The kind that comes before a story begins. And that's where it starts. Chapter 2. The First Division. As the world filled with giants, the gods knew they had to make a choice. Ymir kept growing. His body stretched across the gap like a storm that wouldn't end. His children, the other frost giants, filled the space around him. They didn't build, they didn't shape. They simply expanded, louder, colder, stronger. Chaos wasn't just present now, it was spreading. The gods had come from something quieter. Buri's son Bor had 3 sons of his own, Odin, Vili, and Ve. These brothers were not like Ymir. They didn't just want to survive. They wanted to understand the world, to bring meaning to it. But there was no space for that as long as Ymir's shadow loomed. They watched him closely. Odin, the oldest, noticed how the frost giants fought among themselves. Vili, the curious one, studied how Ymir's presence warped the balance of heat and cold. Ve, the quietest, thought about what would happen if they did nothing. And then they decided. The three brothers confronted the giant. There are no long speeches in this part of the story, no warnings. The gods acted because they believed they had to. This wasn't a battle between good and evil. It was a choice between creation and stagnation. They struck. The clash shook the gap between the realms. Ymir, massive and powerful, fought back. But Odin's spear found its mark. Vili moved with focus. Ve followed with a word that cracked the stillness like thunder. Ymir tried to rise, but he fell. When he died, his blood poured out and filled the gap. It rushed across the void like a flood, drowning many of the frost giants. Only a few escaped, carried away on pieces of wood or ice. Among them was Bergelmir, who would survive to keep the giant's line alive. The brothers stood over Ymir's body, silent. They had done what they came to do. Now the world was theirs to shape, but it would not be easy. They didn't cheer. There were no songs, just the sound of blood turning into rivers and the cold wind shifting direction. The first life had ended, but in its ending, something new had a chance to begin. Chapter 3. After the slaying of Ymir. Ymir's fall wasn't just death, it was the breaking of a pattern. Until that moment, nothing had truly changed. Time had no meaning, space had no shape. Ymir's body had simply existed, filling Ginnungagap with weight and noise. But when the god struck him down, everything shifted. The gods stepped back and looked at what remained. They saw a body the size of a world. Bones, flesh, hair, teeth. Each piece waiting to be used. They didn't see a corpse. They saw material. They saw shape. And more than anything, they saw a chance. So they began. They dragged Ymir's body to the center of the void. From his flesh, they carved the earth. His bones became mountains and cliffs. His teeth and jaws became boulders and stones. His blood formed lakes, rivers, and oceans. Where his skull had once held the weight of dreams, they raised it high and shaped it into the sky. The stars were sparks from Muspelheim, scattered across the dome like glowing dust. From Ymir's brain, they made the clouds, soft, slow-moving layers of thought and memory. The world didn't come into being all at once. It took effort. It took decision. It took time. When they were finished, the gods stood in the middle of it all and gave this new place a name, Midgard, the middle yard, the space between chaos and order. But they weren't done. The edge of the world was still open. So they built a wall around it using Ymir's eyebrows. Not for beauty, but for protection. A border to hold back whatever still lived beyond. Midgard was no paradise. It had storms. It had shadows. But it was stable. It had rules. And it had space for something new. The gods had taken the raw matter of a giant and turned it into a world. Because they believed something better could grow. And somewhere, in the quiet that followed, the wind began to sound different, less like chaos, more like breath. Chapter 4. The world from the body. The gods had shaped the land, the sea, and the sky. But a world made of pieces still needed purpose. Odin, Vili, and Ve stood in the middle of Midgard and looked around. It was solid now. The rivers had paths. The mountains had weight. The stars gave light at night. But something was missing. The world needed order. So they began shaping time. They placed the sun and moon on steady paths. They made day and night follow each other. seasons began to turn. Cold would come, but it would leave. Light would return. The chaos of the void was over. Now things would move in cycles. They gave the stars patterns. The gods watched them mark the sky and taught them to mean something. The movement of stars and shadows became signs, ways to read time, measure distance, and prepare for change. Then came space. They built more realms beyond Midgard. High above, they created Asgard, a realm for gods, bright, tall, and strong. Below, they made Helheim, a realm of rest for the dead. They shaped Jotunheim for the surviving giants, who now lived far beyond the wall. Other worlds formed too, like branches spreading from a tree. That tree was Yggdrasil, not a tree made of wood, but a structure holding all things together. It grew from the center of everything and connected all 9 realms. Its roots ran deep. Its branches touched the stars. Yggdrasil gave the gods perspective. They could move between worlds, learn from other realms, and see how their choices shaped the balance of everything. But Midgard was still special. It was the center, the only world made from Ymir's whole form. It had his bones and blood. It had the sky made from his skull, and the clouds made from his mind. The gods had taken something formless and turned it into something that could be lived in. They didn't rule it yet. They simply shaped it. And now that it had space and time, it needed life. That would come next. Chapter 5. The Boundaries of the Gods. With the world formed, the gods turned their attention to keeping it safe. They knew that chaos didn't vanish with Ymir's death. It had only stepped back. The few surviving giants, the Jötnar, now lived in Jotunheim, the realm beyond Midgard. The gods had placed it far across the borders, behind the protective wall that shielded their new world. The Jötnar were still powerful, still ancient, and still remembering. Some waited quietly. Others held grudges. The gods didn't trust them. Not because they were evil, but because they had come from a world without limits. So they reinforced the borders of Midgard. The wall built from Ymir's eyebrows wasn't just a barrier. It was a line between what could grow and what could destroy. On one side, order, language, and memory. On the other, the wild force of beings older than reason. It wasn't good versus evil. It was structure versus storm. But even walls can't stop everything. Strange winds would still pass over the boundary. Lights would flicker in the sky. Birds would vanish. Trees would whisper in languages no one taught them. The gods watched for signs. They listened to the cracks in the stones and the silence between waves. They started placing guardians at key places in the world. At the edge of Asgard, they built Bifrost, a bridge of rainbow light that could carry them to other realms. It was strong, but not unbreakable. They gave it a watchman, Heimdall, who could see and hear farther than anyone else. His task was simple: to alert them if danger ever returned. Meanwhile, Odin wandered. He wasn't content with just building. He wanted understanding. He traveled through the realms, asking questions, testing boundaries. He gave one of his eyes to a being named Mimir, who guarded a well of deep knowledge. In return, Odin drank from the waters of wisdom. What he saw changed him. He realized that even though they had created order, it wouldn't last forever. Things would move, shift, fall apart. The Jötnar wouldn't stay quiet, and new life would bring new problems. But he didn't fear that. He believed preparation was the answer. So the gods made plans, quiet ones, long-term ones. They didn't talk about it openly. They continued shaping Midgard, lighting the stars, teaching the sky how to turn. But in the background, Odin and his brothers prepared for a time when their new world would be tested. For now, things were calm. But the world they built was not just a place to stand. It was a place to become. And soon, it would have its first people. Chapter 6. The Birth of Humanity. They found them in the trees. Or rather, they found 2 logs, driftwood, shaped by the sea and dried by the wind. One was tall and sturdy. The other was smooth and curved. The gods didn't create humans from clay or light. They used what the world had already offered. The 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, looked at the wood and saw potential. Not life yet, but the pieces of it. Odin gave the first gift, spirit, the breath that starts a heartbeat. Vili gave the second, mind, the ability to think, to notice, to choose. Ve gave the third, form and voice, a body that could move and a mouth that could speak. The driftwood stirred. The 2 figures opened their eyes and sat up. They were named Askanimblar, the ash and the elm. The gods placed them in Midgard, within the wall made from Ymir's brow. It was a strong place, but not an easy one. The sea roared on its edges. The forests were thick. The winds could turn harsh. But there was warmth too. Fire, shelter, stars to guide them. Ask and Embla learned slowly. They watched the sky. They followed animals. They found dry wood and discovered fire. They made shelters. They began to speak, to wonder, to dream. This was what the gods had hoped for. Humans weren't made to be powerful like giants or wise like gods. They were made to grow, to change, and to learn. Others came after them. More people were born. Villages formed. Songs were sung. Children laughed and cried. People watched the stars and gave them names. They told stories. They remembered. Midgard began to fill. The gods didn't interfere often. They watched from above, stepping in only when balance was at risk. This was a human world now, a space between extremes. But outside the wall, the Jötnar watched too. Some of them were curious. Others were angry. They saw what the gods had made and wondered if it would last. From far-off places, deep forests, high mountains, distant oceans, came whispers, shadows, and silence that felt too still. Humanity had begun, but peace was not guaranteed. Still, the gods stood together and looked down on their creation. Not perfect, but alive. Not finished, but full of hope. And Ymir, in a way, remained. His bones were the hills. His breath was in the wind. His dreams, maybe, in the minds of humans, who now stood upright, looked at the stars, and started to ask why. Chapter 7. The Echoes of Chaos. The wall around Midgard still held, but the quiet beyond it had begun to shift. In Jotunheim, the frost giants lived far from the reach of the gods. They told stories of the world that had been taken from them. In their version, Odin had not brought order. He had stolen power. Ymir's fall marked the loss of something vast, and the beginning of an age they hadn't chosen. The giants waited. They trained their young. They watched the world the gods had built and wondered how long it would last. In Midgard, life moved forward. Humans built homes, shared firelight, and passed down the runes that Odin had taught. Each generation added new stories, but in the outer reaches, frozen forests, hidden valleys, strange things began to appear. Unfamiliar footprints, faint lights that flickered in the distance, a silence in the woods that felt unnatural. Travelers whispered of unease, nothing loud, nothing obvious, but something had changed. Odin felt it more than he saw it. He left Asgard again, following paths through the unseen, the branches of Yggdrasil, the wells of deep memory, and the edges where knowledge waited. At Mimir's well, he gave up more of himself in return for vision that reached beyond the present. What he learned brought little comfort. The world would face new threats. The giants would return with patience and cunning. The gods would grow distracted. Time itself would test the shape they had given the world. But there was still time to prepare. When Odin returned, he didn't speak of what he had seen. He taught instead. More runes, more ways to understand change. He gave humans the tools to remember, to think carefully, to notice when the world began to shift again. Stories, he believed, could become shields. Chapter 8. The Dream Remains. Time passed. The world settled into patterns, storm and calm, life and loss. Generations of humans lived and died inside Midgard's walls. Some prayed to the gods, others ignored them. A few even forgot them. But the world stayed. The gods stayed too. Odin continued to wander, always searching, always planning. Vili and Ve became quieter, their work hidden but present. The giants still watched from afar. Some waited, others grew restless. And deep beneath it all, something older remained. The world was made from Ymir's body, but maybe more than just his bones and blood remained. In the wind, in the slow shifting of the mountains, in the low rumble before a storm, there were signs, not of thought, but of presence. Some said every earthquake was Ymir shifting in his sleep. Some said the dreams people had of great floods, strange beasts, or endless space were echoes of his mind, still drifting somewhere in the layers of the world. Parents told children stories by the fire. They'd say the land they stood on was once alive, that every hill had once been part of something much bigger, that the sea used to be a heartbeat, that the stars had once floated in the skull of a giant. These weren't warnings, they weren't lessons, just quiet truths, reminders that everything comes from something. Ymir wasn't loved, he wasn't hated, he just was. He was the start. The gods would rise and fall, the wall would stand and break, giants would return, chaos would come again, but the world beneath our feet would remain, shaped from sacrifice, marked by memory. And maybe, in the quietest moments, if you listen closely, you can feel it. That steady breath below the soil, that echo in the wind, a reminder that something ancient is still there. If you enjoyed this Norse story, I think you'll really like the one I've linked in the video description. It explores another ancient tale with just as much wonder. If you found peace, curiosity, or something to dream about in this story, feel free to like the video and subscribe to our channel. And as always, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, sometimes the world beneath your feet was once a story too. I'm wishing you a legendary sleep.